Good morning and welcome. Everyone come in and get settled. Welcome to the UCCE Master Gardener Program of Riverside County and Western Municipal Water District Water Efficient Landscape Workshop. Your hosts today are Janice Rosner, Master Gardener, and me, Lisa Lemoyne, Master Gardener and Western staff. Janice?
Before we get started, I'd like to make mention of the Master Gardener events. We are available at multiple locations during the week and on the weekends in such places as the farmer markets and special events. As an example, the Lavender Festival in Cherry Valley is on right now, and we are there both Saturday and Sunday with our information table and a wonderful display. So look for the farmers markets in your local area. We usually have a table there with free information. It is all science-based information. Our job is to educate the public on gardening and horticultural practices. Be sure to look for us. On the first Saturday of each month, RCRCD has a Master Gardener table. RCRCD is a public learning center. So you are invited to tour the 3-acre demonstration garden at any time. Okay, so thank you very much.
Okay, we'll meet here again on June 11th to hear John Huddleston, owner of Precision Tree Experts, with helpful information on maintaining our trees during these very difficult and dry times. Please submit your questions through the chat feature this morning, and we will submit them to the speaker. We'll post resources such as Master Gardener's Hotline in the chat for specific challenges you may be facing at home in your own yard. For today's workshop, it is my total pleasure to introduce to you today Daniel Aaron Francis. Daniel has studied and made a living from fully integrated ecological design work for the last 24 years, with an intense focus on water harvesting and tending the health of our watershed. He believes in common sense practices and uses gravity to his favor. He is a 5th-generation River Cityan. Yay! Welcome, Daniel. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Honored to be here. And thank all of you for jumping on this workshop call today. Still getting used to the new technologies of using Zoom. And so if I have any, if I make any missteps, I ask for your forgiveness now. I'm hoping we can make this smooth. And we had a little trial run with Lisa last week. So I'm feeling pretty confident that this will be just fine. The last time I gave this presentation was about 3 years ago. And I'll be giving a very similar presentation. So if you tuned into the one 3 years ago, some of this will be review for you, to say the least, but I have updated it to a certain degree and changed some things here and there. But it's still a great overview for water harvesting in the urban environment. I'm speaking to you from the Southwest. I'm actually in Santa Fe at this moment. The fires are not far from here. If you've been tuning into national news, you may have been following that some. It's been really, really dry here, like so much of the West and Southwest. It's been heartbreaking to see these fires move at the pace that they're moving at, and the unfortunate conditions making near impossible for containment. So it's with a lot of
I think Daniel's microphone is off.
I think, yeah.
See, we're already starting. I already got the first little Little hazard out of the way. I'm not sure how I got muted, but I was muted. So,
I think it was me.
oh, that's okay. Thanks. What I wanted to say was, I'm not sure where I left off or where you could
I'm
hear.
looking at this Riverside Community Water Conservation Program.
Yes.
Can you guys hear that? I'm just wondering if anyone else can hear.
I just muted them.
Yeah. Okay, great. You can still hear me?
Yes.
All right, here we go. So, I'm in the Southwest and giving a lot of thanks for being safe here in Santa Fe. And my friends' places have all been okay. And some other friends just discovered that their house is still standing after being evacuated nearly a month ago. So it's interesting timing to give this presentation, as water harvesting is the key to all drylands environments and for any kind of human habitation for the long haul. So we're really getting into territory that's not only rich and timely, but essential for the future of human development and design and retrofit, for that matter. That's mostly what we're talking about, is a retrofit. So I will jump right into my presentation here. I'm going to see if I can pull this off. Let's see. Give me just a moment. Is that coming through, Lisa? Do I need to expand it fully so that it doesn't show the sidebar? Is that how that works? Or can you?
Yes.
Yes, okay, let me see. Okay. How's that?
Mm-mm.
Put your cursor on slideshow.
Yes.
Oh, I love that I'm getting schooled here. Let's see.
At the top bar.
Top bar. Mhm.
There you go. And play from the start at the very far left.
Perfect. Lisa, you have the calmest voice when you give guidance. So grateful.
There you
Okay.
are.
How's that? That look good?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Great. And I believe Justin Scott Coe of Joe Scott Coe and Justin Scott Coe. I think Justin is on this call right now, somewhere in layover, I believe, in Nashville. And I think he would have loved to have been a part of the full presentation, but clearly had plans he had to stay committed to. And I just want to give immediate gratitude to him and his wife for taking the plunge to completely retrofit their landscape in ways that were relatively new to the Riverside area, and really went out on a limb to trust myself and Marilyn Morris to create what is now an incredibly beautiful and functional landscape. So thank you, Justin. Thank you, Joe. This is a great photograph just to get us started. So this is a fairly average looking landscape, right? That we've all seen throughout Riverside area. A tufted, proud to the hardscape surrounding it, lawn that's partially dead there. I think they were starting to let go by the time we took this photograph, and they weren't trying so hard to keep it super lush. You can see some water there in the gutter. You'll see some more slides of that in the future here. And this is the property in the Wood Streets that we'll be talking about. This is Justin's house, of course, and you can see his political leanings based on those signs there in his front yard. And this was some years ago now. I can't remember the exact year, but I want to say about 8 years ago. I wish Justin could chime in. He would know for certain. I have had a lot of projects.
I can unmute Justin if you would like.
Oh, if that's possible, yeah.
He's there.
We started.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I'm in a national airport waiting area, so it's very noisy. But I think 8 years ago sounds about right.
Okay. Brilliant. Thank you, Justin. So glad you're here. Okay, so we're going to talk about how to do this to a landscape. So we went from here, right? And in the end, this is what we achieved. And we'll go through a lot of the different steps to get to something like this. And there are different opportunities in every landscape. We did everything we could do to harvest just about every last drop of water that comes through Justin and Joe's landscape. So I wouldn't have a complete presentation without acknowledging a good friend, colleague, co-designer who passed away last fall, Marilyn Morris. Probably some of you on this call already know who she is. Yeah, we lost an incredible person, and I miss her on the daily. Still hard to fully integrate the fact that she's not with us anymore. She was just a wonderful human being, and I've been hard pressed to find anyone else that I'd want to co-design at that level with. And she was just a masterful botanist and a masterful designer when it came to particularly to California natives. And when we put our efforts together, we were able to do things that kind of defy what you normally see in any kind of landscape, what's possible. And so she's very missed. And we were sitting together 3 years ago when we first gave this talk. So much of what you see in this landscape is due to her incredible skill level with putting the plants in the right place, maximizing microclimate, and finding a way to have something bloom literally year round at almost any given time. So much gratitude and love to Marilyn Morris. And I would be remiss to not mention Bill Mollison. This guy changed my life and got me started on the path of integrated ecological design. Really the first text of interdisciplinary earth science came by way of something called permaculture. Bill was the man to really spearhead this work, and a lot of other folks as well. But he was the main influence in my life. I've had the chance to meet him in the early 2000s, and he has been a phenomenal force in the world for bringing together all these different disciplines to make a design process possible. Oh, I hear a child's voice.
Oh.
Sweet. That quote is one of my favorite quotes, still stands today. We have so many of the solutions to these issues that we're facing. We'll talk more about that as we go through. So Bill Mollison, father of permaculture, if you will. And here is, I always kind of redefining permaculture design, created this one last night. Let me see if I can do something here for myself. Let me do that. Great. An ethically driven design process that integrates new and old world technologies while mimicking the intelligence and resilience of intact ecologies, which we have fewer of every year, to create regenerative human settlements. And I added some other little taglines here at the bottom: to think generationally, think globally, do something, please, all of you, if you're not already doing something with this work, do something. Turn inspiration into action, which is what was on the gates, above the gates on a marquee as I left a place called the Solar Living Institute in 1997 that set me on this path. It was a brilliantly brilliantly designed 10-acre parcel for education that anyone could access off the 101 highway. It's actually for sale right now. That's a long story. The property's for sale and ready for new stewardship. If any of you have $3.5 million you'd like to lend me, I would love to take that over. So just let me know. Keep me posted after this. You'll have my phone number. You can easily give me a call. Go. How do I get back to? There we go. Oh, is this? Yeah. Okay. Great. at the heart of this work really is a kind of reverence for water. And this can be best captured, I believe, by this poem from Wendell Berry. And I'll read it for you. Fear of dust in my mouth is always with me, and I am the faithful husband of the rain. I love the water of wells and springs and the taste of roofs in the water of cisterns. I'm a dry man whose thirst is praise of clouds and whose mind is something of a cup. My sweetness is to wake in the night after days of dry heat, hearing the rain. I read this last night to prep for this call today, this talk, and realized that we're so into the new territory. That last line of it's months of dry heat instead of days, a strange new kind of measurement, unfortunately for us. Okay, water harvesting 101. You got to think like a watershed, right? Normally we're looking at the bigger picture of a watershed is peak to beach, how the water runs its way, say in the Santa Ana River watershed, all the way from like the Hart Bar campground area, the top of the San Bernardino Mountains there, all the way to the Newport region where the Santa Ana actually meets the ocean. But in the context of urban design, you're looking at gable to gutter, right? You're looking at the top of your roof line and across whatever land you actually have your home situated on. And really this is about stewardship of your own, what we would call a sub-watershed. And this one, this plant the water first concept really could just be a whole presentation unto itself. We're looking at slowing water down. We're looking at spreading it out into the landscape. We're looking at getting it into the ground, hence sink it. We're looking at maybe storing it in tanks or other kinds of cisterns. And we're looking to also share it, not only with the local wildlife, but with our neighbors, particularly in times where we really need resilience, like the kind of summers we'll be facing. Repatterning the landscape for water receptivity. So think concave versus convex, right? We're just looking at how to shape landscapes so that they don't shed water, which is how engineers normally design a landscape, is to try to get the water away as fast as possible. We're trying to see how long we can keep it on site. And you'll see that over and over in these photographs coming up. And yes, I added rip out your lawn if you haven't already, thank you. And I say that with, oh, actually there's this great new term that I just learned this morning from Lisa. There's this concept of non-functional turf. And I think they're trying to define that right now so that commercial turf may be going away if it is considered non-functional in order to deal with the crisis that we're having water-wise in Southern California and the Western Municipal Water District regions. I would argue that the majority of turf is non-functional. And if you consider mowing it and edging it and tending it and fertilizing it, that might be some of the only real use many lawns actually receive. Okay, this is the last heavy information slide, I promise. So we'll just walk through it. Yes, water is life. Brock Dolman, if you ever want to check out some other interesting talks on water, you can look up Brock Dolman at the Water Institute in Northern California. He makes a great argument at some of the beginning of his slideshows. Is this planet Earth or planet water? And if you consider it's something like 71% of the surface of the Earth is covered in water, I think you could argue for the latter. Conservation is key. Our daily habits really is the low-hanging fruit. How much water do we use? Do you leave the tap running when you don't need to? And of course, lawn culture has to go away for us to actually survive the future. And the answer is ecological. It's not throwing a bunch of gravel in your front yard or in your backyard. That'll just create more of a heat island effect. And it's definitely not microplastic, fake grass. Just got to say that right off the top here. There's no ecological services, ecosystem services inside either of those solutions, if you could call them that. Gray water, we'll talk a little bit about that. It's all about reusing good fresh water over and over and over again everywhere we can. Legalizing sustainability, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the gray water section. So we're looking at two things, active harvest and passive harvest. Active harvesting is really just about putting water into tanks or cisterns or some kind of container. We're always looking at hundreds, if not thousands of gallons, depending on your situation, but really most people have a roof line big enough. We'll talk more about that. That water remains on demand. In other words, you can either have a pump hooked up to it, so it can be integrated into your irrigation system itself, or it can just come by way of gravity fed from a simple turning of a valve and a hose hookup, and you can go around deep watering your plants that way and trees. Passive harvest, on the other hand, is looking at how to store water into basins, into scallop depressions or swales. There's a lot of different words for that, and actually get it into the soil, slowly but surely raising water table levels over time in specific small regions like a front yard. For years, they weren't certain if that was even happening underground. And then Art Ludwig started creating more data points than imaginable to prove that that is actually what is happening. And this, of course, just makes that water available to the surrounding plants and tree root systems. Really, the conversation at this point in my assessment through these 20 plus years of doing this work, like everything is really about native plants, trees, and gardens, and not much else really fits in there. Parks are wonderful for turf. You want to talk about functional turf. I think about Bonominio Park, downtown Riverside, just how much amazing use that gets. Absolutely an appropriate use for turf. But front yards, backyards, I think I've already made my point there. Trees are hydraulic pumps. All plants are hydraulic pumps. Got to get their water from somewhere. Getting water to their root systems is the key here. And this is the whole repatterning of landscapes, like I mentioned earlier. We're looking at, of course, creating wildlife habitat, shade, food, medicine, erosion control, carbon sink, fiber, all of life really sustained through these ecosystem services that come by way of these incredible ecological machines, if you want. Shade harvesting will probably be Brad Lancaster's next book, if I had to guess. We'll talk more about Brad Lancaster. His work really informs the majority of what I do when it comes to water harvesting. Shade harvesting will likely be, like I said, the next text, because we're going to have to look at how to cool the urban environment, and really the way to do that, to cut back on this heat island effect, is to create shade. So we need trees in the right places. We need the right trees. And if they could produce food on top of shade, then we're really looking at stacking functions in a kind of way that just makes a lot of common sense. And Toby Hemingway, one of my early teachers, he's written multiple books on permaculture, amazing guy who also sadly passed away. Add organic matter was kind of his mantra. I heard that more times than I can imagine. And it's true, we've got to build the soil sponge. Its ability to hold water by way of organic matter is the future will depend on it. Okay, so back to this average landscape, Justin and Joe's home. Let's walk you through that process. So here we are, like getting into the clean slate of things, ripping out the lawn, starting to mark up some different possible areas for excavation. I should mention right off the top here, whenever you're going to dig, if you decide to do any of this work at home, call 811-DIG. This is the easiest way to find out from different utilities what is underground that you may run into, so that you don't break your water main, you don't run into an electrical line, etc. They'll come out and mark for free. They can only do it to a certain point in your backyard, and yeah, most of those services you are concerned with are in the front yard, with some exceptions. But do your part to find out what's underground before you start going too deep. And when I say deep, I really mean more than a shovelful or two. And some of these systems, as you will see, they do go that deep. And this is actually Nathan Morris. This is Marilyn's son. He gave us a hand on more than one occasion here as we completely changed this landscape. You can see the rock in the back being stacked up as some of the first basins being defined. They haven't been fully cut in yet. We're just starting to get some things situated. That's a giant pile of decomposed granite that will become the pathways in front there. So here's the beginning infiltration basins, or also known as bioswales. You can see in that photograph there, it's pretty deep. It's 2.5 feet deep, if I remember correctly. And water is coming off of the roof line of the home, drops into a small little dry creek bed, and slowly makes its way around the driveway or along the driveway down to a first basin that's in front of that window that you can see there on the right. It's a very small basin there. And then it crosses the pathway, just like a creek might. There's some rocks there to prevent down cutting or erosion issues when the water really flows. And then it makes its way into that large basin, which is not a koi pond, which was the most common question I received while working on this system. And you can see the sides of this are armored with rock in a really stout kind of way. This prevents any major erosion. It also creates the opportunity to stack rocks up to the top edge there for beauty. And it's all still permeable. Water can access between the rocks for lateral protrusion and absorption of moisture. And the bottom, of course, is completely soft bottom. It's just dirt. So water can percolate. You've got to do percolation tests. I got to mention this as well. You can dig a hole as large as a 5-gallon bucket, fill it full with water, and then you want to clock how long it takes for that water to fully be absorbed into the soil. That's a percolation, simple, basic percolation test. In the areas that you're considering putting basins, you want to do that. You also want to keep yourself 9 feet away from structures, particularly slab foundations, so that you don't get a kind of wicking of moisture through the slab and creating water damage as it tries to vent its way underneath your hardwood flooring, for example. And then all of these, this is pre-backfilled with mulch, this basin that you're looking at. So eventually here it gets backfilled with mulch and starts to create that sponge effect. It also stops the mosquito vector potential because there's no water that's sitting and exposed. So it doesn't become a breeding ground as it clears after a heavy rain. And believe it or not, this basin did fill up at least once during one major storm, probably multiple times would be my guess now. It's hard to always know that unless you're really monitoring the outlet. So, okay. This is where things lead. It's really even hard to see that basin now as the vegetation starts to pick up. There are a lot of other basins in this landscape, and I'll show you. There's the one closest to the top right, to the door there. You can see that. That's a small basin there before it crosses the path. And then on the left, you're seeing the larger basin and another smaller basin in front of it. Again, once vegetation starts to establish, and you do create shelving inside your basins if you do it wisely, to give access for these shallower rooted plants, most of them here native in these pictures, to access that moisture that's now in the soil in the earlier part of the year during flowering. So this gives you an example. This is 1,500 gallons total of storage in the front yard, all on the ground in basins. And that's, of course, if they get fully charged. That's the capacity. During a heavy downfall, that could easily happen. So that first one is 150 gallons, and then it runs into the 800 gallon. The small 50 gallon that's over near the sidewalk and the driveway, that is the last of the runoff that comes from the driveway. Consider driveways, consider pathways, consider sidewalks, your second roof line. It's all part of that same watershed. It's an impervious structure that you can account for in terms of your total gallon potential of harvest for the landscape. Obviously, you're going to use passive water harvesting, and which is the basins that we're talking about during this type of water harvest. There's not an easy way to put this kind of water into a cistern to be on demand later, or a tank for that matter. And then there's what are called curb cuts here towards the street side. And you can see those, you can see in this photograph, at least one of the curb cuts. There's two here in the full length, but you can see the one, and you see where it says 300 gallons. That allows water to come in from the street side and actually get into the parkway and create an incredible abundance of moisture for all those plants there in the parkway. There's another one downstream, if you will, of about 200 gallons, a little smaller. And we'll have some more photographs of that coming up soon here. So this is what got Justin started. He dubbed this Beechwood Creek. He lives on Beechwood in the Wood Streets, and you can see that standing water. This is just from someone overwatering upstream, if you will, and the reality of the degradation of the road there and not a very level gutter. I'm sure some of you might even have this in front of your front yard where it's just been, there's some broken concrete. You can see the curb there is busted. And so this becomes a pretty terrible mosquito vector, not to mention just a sad sight for a use of fresh water that's actually potable, right? When it first comes out of that sprinkler. Yeah, something to consider. 0.5% of the Earth's water is what we have to work with when it comes to fresh water. It's actually a total of 3%, but 2.5% of it is unavailable or so polluted that we can't use it. So that's just something to blow your mind with, and why I do this work, and hopefully you too. Another sad, lazy, good-for-nothing parkway. And I say that because this is one of those strange gray areas in landscapes, which is why we decided to do the curb cut here. When I first mentioned it to Justin in Maryland, it just made sense. And we figured out how to do it. There was no other retrofit curb cut in Riverside County to our knowledge. And we pioneered the permitting process so that it'll be easier for any of you if you decide to do this someday. And we made good use of this parkway instead of just being a patch of grass, yet again, another patch of grass with lots of water needs and fertilization needs. So this is what this starts to look like here down at the curbside level. We were fortunate enough to have the city honor a request to re-pour, and this is rare that they would do this, especially in the timely nature of a landscape retrofit. They were able to re-pour the curb here for us to our standards. And normally you would cut this with concrete cutting saws, and then hence why it's called a curb cut. And anywhere from about 12 to 18 inches wide. The inlet is the outlet. That'll make more sense here when I show you a video shortly. It leads to a basin in the parkway. And that basin, of course, holds those 300 gallons or the 200 gallons downstream from here. You armor it really well with good rock work, and that keeps any kind of scouring. Now, the asphalt hadn't been re-poured here. You could kind of see that in the very foreground, and that did get patched together. So all this, in the end, looked completely, quote, normal. Not edible plants and go into the parkways. Obviously, you're getting a lot of toxic runoff. But interestingly enough, when there's a lot of mulch present, there's a lot of biological activity and plants, and there is an actual argument to be made that this becomes a miniature stormwater runoff treatment plant, these basin systems. You're always intercepting upstream runoff, which keeps strong biological activity and microbiological activity in the breaking down of carbon into soil. We could literally have an entire other 1 or 2 hour conversation just about that aspect of this particular design. Community. There's a lot of work digging basins out, and it's a lot of earth moving, and there's machines for that for sure, but really the opportunity in the urban environment to go a little slower and have people involved. I don't recall everyone in this slide. Maybe one of you is watching. There's Fertino Morales, good friend of mine here. He's on the right there. You can see him with the sunglasses and the hat. He now works for UCR in the sustainability department, doing great work over there. It took us 2 years to finish this permitting process to make this legal. This is an example of legalizing sustainability. These kind of retrofits, we've got to just make them simple and easy to happen, especially with gray water, which we'll talk about a little more in the future here. Yeah, it took over 40 people. I did a count at one point. all kinds of friends of Justin and Joe's, people from the neighborhood, people through the permaculture guild that I was running at the time in Riverside, lots of my good friends and other folks that we had to hire to come in and help make this possible. Again, this gets into the armoring of these properly. This is, you've got to have someone who understands basic rock work, or you got to learn it yourself and you can do it. The parkways are just that much more sensitive to the reality that folks are going to step occasionally off the path, right? Or they're getting out of their cars along the curbside. And this is a particularly narrow parkway, so it required a little extra attention to detail to create those grade transitions that were safe. You can see some of these empty pockets there. Those are plant shelvings. And you can see the drip line starting to get routed through there to mitigate those hotter parts of the season where it does need some supplemental water. Here it is actually backfilled with mulch and some of the early plantings. And here's a video. Let's see if I can get this to play. Yeah, there we go. This will speak for itself. You can see this is the inlet, is the outlet. Once those basins are fully charged, and you can see all that water there, the hydrostatic pressure allows the water to just move itself right back out. You can see that swirling effect happening, and it just rejoins the stream. This was after a particularly heavy rain, still raining right there as I'm taking the video. Now you can imagine how much this would cut down if every parkway in front of each home had this feature. You would have a lot less stormwater runoff into the Santa Ana River. And that would be a good thing given all the pollution that it carries to the river during these storm events. This is pretty self-explanatory. That's me, younger version of me, standing there with a very large pile of river rock. I have had clients source all of this rock sometimes for free. There's just so much of it in our Southern California region. Yeah, don't underestimate the power of OfferUp and Craigslist, or folks you might know who just have a lot of this on some land that they own. I've also got urbanite on there, which is a joke, but now has become just common in the lexicon in permaculture because we use so much broken reclaimed concrete that we refer to it as urbanite at this point. Rocks, bricks, any kind of hardscape has a lot of use in the water harvesting world. And you can create an enormous amount of habitat with the way that you stack rocks by creating voids and empty spaces, places for lizards, places for all kinds of insects. It really can be a serious boost to the ecological equilibrium of a home site, to a garden, to a native landscape, or all of the above. And yes, you'll want help from your friends. This is a lot of rock moving. This is the driveway of Justin and Joe's home. And this is the blank slate portion. I think all that is removal up at the top towards the garage there of what we've already ripped out. And yeah, this is pretty common. You'll see this throughout Riverside area, urban areas. And in fact, what I'm seeing more of, sadly, is people put in more concrete just to widen these. It's about the last thing we need is more concrete in the world. Here is a one rock dam. This is a concept that you'll find particularly outlined in Brad Lancaster's rainwater harvesting books. It's essentially a very simple loose check dam by properly stacking rocks partially buried into the soil with a basin on the upstream side. Will slow the water down so it has time to percolate. In this case, we wanted it to percolate at the root level of these freshly planted citrus trees. And as you can see, they've been put in here. This is the before, like right after they were planted. And here's a couple years later. This is how it looks. When you do water harvesting work, landscapes spring to life in ways that are slightly unimaginable. I'm always astounded at the rate of growth. versus just using drip irrigation without any earthworks, any changing of the pattern of the landscape for receptivity of water. So this is the same driveway on looking, of course, towards the street side. And you can see that cut in the foreground. Justin just couldn't give up. He wanted to harvest, like I said, every last drop, bless his heart, and asked me to come back to make this cut in the driveway because he saw so much water just running down the driveway from the garage roof overflow. And so I came out and made this cut so we could intercept all that water. Those are just loosely stacked, smaller river rock pieces that allow water to make its way over to the right there of the photograph that runs along that dry creek bed that takes its way out to the first 150-gallon basin and then overflows into the larger basin, the 800-gallon basin. This is backyard, side yard, pretty average as well there on the left. That's us to the clean slate on the right, just making room for the new design. And this is a 865-gallon tank. When this arrived on a pallet at Justin's house, I think he panicked, thinking that this was way too oversized of a tank. And nothing could be further from the truth. This is an incredibly undersized cistern for their roof line. I'll explain that as we go forward, but it can be shocking at first when you see these tanks arrive. I try to prep clients now prior to tank arrival. I just had a tank delivered to a client in the Canyon Crest region, a 5,050-gallon tank, if you can imagine the size of that tank. This tank here that we're looking at is 865 gallons, and it overflows every year during the rainy season. This is what it looks like installed in that same side yard. Tank systems are pretty straightforward. You've got a leaf feeder, which you can see up there on the wall. It's that kind of little, how would I describe that? It's protruding a little further just below the gutter that's attached to the wall. And that essentially has a nice stainless screen right there that keeps any other debris from getting into the tank. And then below that, which is kind of harder to see, the way those pipes are moving around, there's something called a first flush diverter, which allows some of that sediment and smaller fragments of maybe roof granules and dirt that come through that leaf feeder to find its way into a long column of 3-inch PVC that's mounted to the wall. And it just slowly fills as the water's first coming in. And that water is separate from the water that actually makes its way into the tank. That's a very simple, no moving parts system that you then drain away out of that pipe that I described that's attached to the wall after the rains have gone. And it allows you to put only clean water into that tank. And you can see the hose at the bottom there. That's wrapping around to a simple quarter turn brass valve at the bottom of the tank. And the tank is just slightly elevated so that it's higher than all the basins in the backyard. And you're able to turn that valve, open it, and allow water to be discharged into any part of the yard. And this, of course, is just gravity working to your favor. This is considered a dry system because it's directly from the gutter to the tank. You can use what's called a wet system, and that's more common actually for my installs. So the tank can be placed much further away from the house. The water goes underground, travels through a pipe that stays charged with water once it's filled up from rainwater and finds its way into the tank. As long as the inlet on the tank is lower than where the water transitions to that leaf feeder on the wall, water will always find its own level. It's basic physics. So the water will always find its way in. No pumps necessary. You just got to make sure the inlet on the tank is lower wherever it's placed in the landscape, even if it's hundreds of feet away from the house, and the water will find its way into the tank. It's something you can count on. 55-gallon barrels are kind of a joke. I know some of you might have some kind of rebate from the city. I don't mean to throw shade at that. It's just that we're looking at hundreds of gallons is what we've got to be thinking about. And you can see that here in these calculations. So an average year, which I'm calling 7 inches of rain as our average wet season now, which historically was closer to 10. Of course, this is global weirding, global warming. 1,500 square foot home, you'll get around 6,500 gallons of water. An easy way to think about this is every 1,000 square foot of roof line that you're harvesting off of, or if you're even looking at a sidewalk or a driveway, you're looking at 600 gallons every time 1 inch of rain accumulates. So if we get 2 storms of half-inch storms, you're looking at 600 gallons off of that 1,000 square feet. So you want to think bigger with tanks. And I put the average cost has gone up tremendously since I last gave this talk. People are queued into tanks. It's kind of insane. I can hardly get tanks now. We're looking at 11 price increases over the past year and something like over a year lead time to get tanks. Occasionally I can score something sooner, but it's become nearly impossible. There's one company that's nearly cornering the market on tanks by buying out all the other companies. You get where this is going. The scarcity of fresh water is a real thing in the dryland environment. And we all know water prices are never going to go down. They're only going to go up. So if you average $2.50 per gallon of an installed tank system, that includes all the piping and the labor, just so that makes a little more sense to you if you're trying to calc a system for your own home. This is Justin and Joe's backyard. Prior to our work, you can see those brick planters. I made every use of all that brick. You can see that gorgeous jacaranda to the right. He has another one to the left that will flank the whole seating area. Great deep shade, gorgeous old trees, I think, that date back to the construction of the home. You can also see that really beautiful crepe myrtle in the back left, and there's a Valencia orange tree that's also very old back there. And then you see this amazing amount of hardscape that has no good use. And I believe it was originally a badminton court. And it's badly cracked, and I never saw Justin play badminton out there, and so it was time to come out. Oh, it doubled as a shooting hoops court, basketball court, which I never saw Justin do either. We might have to unmute him so he can defend himself. Okay, so all that decided to come out, and here's the Urbanite Harvest broken concrete. I made very particular cuts to pull all this out because I had another client across town who wanted some serious upcycled broken concrete pathways and patios and seating areas. Yeah, and that's exactly what we did. Let's see. Yep, here it is out. Bye-bye. Doing some grading work, getting things ready. Here's the clean slate. So Preston Gillespie, who's an ecology professor over at Riverside Community College, hired me to come in and do this. And here we are using all the broken concrete and cut concrete from the badminton court. You can kind of see those stripes that are unique to the outline of the badminton court. You can see those still pressed in there and some of the broken pieces. And we created a patio in front of his front door here and a pathway as well. So we're switching to a different landscape here. We won't spend very much time with this. I have one little video to show you as well, and then we'll go back to Justin's place. But here's a different layout entirely here. So you can see the pathway forming with decomposed granite. The entire thing is just dry stacked. There's no concrete mud. It's still stable 8 years later and gorgeous. These are all basins that you can see. Each one flows into the next. All that rainwater coming off the roof line in front goes to here. All the water coming off the roof line in the back goes to 6,600 gallons of water storage that aren't in this photograph, that are in tanks. You can see us building the capstones on those terraced walls, on the lower terrace wall. Those are all broken concrete from, or actually cut concrete from the photograph just a couple back from Justin's backyard badminton court. Here's a video to help you see some other rainwater harvesting features. So this is after planting and after the patio was laid. So here you go. And I apologize, my finger will cover the screen partially in here because it was during an actual rain event. So there's water trickling into that basin. It will slowly overflow into that basin. and then works its way over to that basin that you can't see so well on the right there, and then overflows slowly through this permeable paving, or also known as gravel and decomposed granite, for a driveway. And as the water shuttles down the driveway here, you can see I've got these broken pieces of concrete buried on their side, channeling the water into these basins. So each one of those basins is about 3 feet deep and 5 feet wide. And there are all these trees planted along that now. That one's flowing a little less so, it's not getting the same amount of runoff. And then down here again, you will see more water flowing into another basin. So there's 4 basins. There's one last basin here to collect the runoff during heavier storms. And again, all those are treed now. You get the idea. This is over by UCR. So they've got the foothills of the Box Springs Mountains contributing to some enormous, enormous runoff. That was a particularly large rain event. Okay. Back to Justin and Joe's backyard. So here it is, pre-clean slate. When we first got there, there's those beautiful jacarandas I mentioned. Lots of lawn, and this is obviously very common. And here we are re-patterning for receptivity. Now you can see the pathway over there is high and dry. That's on the right. And then you can see these are large basins made with the brick to shore up the beautiful river rock, which will be proud and be seen while the rest of it's backfilled with mulch. That blue flag in the center there represents a future planting of an apricot tree that just went bananas, as you will see in future slides here. And this is the beginning of the gray water system as well. So these basins are going to be fed by the laundry that's done between Justin and Joe. Pathways again, and the seating area in the back between the jacarandas. You can see how much more proud they are than all of the rest of the design. That's very intentional. You want your pathways high and dry and everything else to be slightly depressed and then or channeled, very micro contoured, particular to where you want the majority of that water to settle. Again here, just another a view of that same soon to be apricot gray water basin. So this is a laundry to landscape system. This is the most uninteresting photograph in the slideshow. This is legal now, thanks to Art Ludwig and others like him who made that happen a little over a decade ago now. As long as you follow some very specific guidelines that aren't too hard to meet, you will be in accordance with the law for California, and you will not get into any kind of trouble putting one of these systems in yourself. You don't need a permit. You see the turquoise colored handle, that's the 3-way brass valve that is the magic to the system. If you turn it upright, in this case, then the water will go to the sewer, just the way it did before. So if you're using bleach or other harsh chemicals of any kind, you can count on that water staying out of your landscape. If you turn it down to the left, in this case, it's running to the actual landscape. So it's just a simple turn of a very basic ball valve, and you can guide the water for every time you do your laundry into your landscape or back to the sewer. This price has probably gone up since then. Yeah, just that brass valve alone is like $125, $150 now. And there are quite a few other parts, and it does take about a day of work for a couple people to get these installed. These are those basins that water will then be going to. Citrus love gray water, whereas something like an avocado, for example, that's really sensitive to salinity is not so interested in the salts that come from detergents. And there are better salts. They're not all created equal in the detergent world. Looking at Oasis Gray Water website, you can get an idea of the best and properly tested gray water appropriate detergents, so that it actually becomes food for your plants and not something destructive and harmful. So here you can see we're chucking in the granny bricks that I pulled out, the brick, other pieces of broken concrete. Eventually these all get lined on top with beautiful river rock. And if you see those little valve boxes that have a rock or a piece of hardscape on them on left and right of, say, the citrus tree in the foreground. Inside of one of each of those is a simple quarter turn ball valve that allows you to adjust the flow of the water coming from the actual washing machine every time a load is done. It's a very simple analog system, and you can control it. There's about 5 outlets from this system, if I remember correctly, to each tree. And here the trees are backfilled. I guess there are not rocks around the perimeter there, just straight to mulch. It's an avocado in the back corner. This is an older photograph. All this has been filled out since then. That's Mike Nim's amazing carpentry work for a soon to be hanging swing here. Yeah, there you go. That kind of completes the picture. So all those trees on the left-hand side are being watered with gray water and require very little supplemental water as long as they're doing laundry on a semi-regular basis. You can see that apricot tree, there's only a couple years old in that photograph. It's massive now. Yeah, and here you are in the seating area before compaction of that decomposed granite and the lack of a badminton court. And this is just a photograph to kind of give you a bit of a better idea of the transition between hardscape, in this case, still permeable, the decomposed granite on the right, and then the rock work, and then these somewhat depressed basins on the left here for all these natives. That's really the conclusion of today's talk. I know I'm going to take questions here shortly. I just want to say these are excellent resources for your exploration into water harvesting further. There were so many things we could have dove down deeper into. To give you an example of an average permaculture course, which looks at, like I said, the interdisciplinary aspect of bringing all these different ecological functions together in creating conscious human settlement design, you're looking at 144 hours for a basic design course. And that just barely scratches the surface. So today's talk is, of course, very truncated, but hopefully was worth your while. Brad Lancaster, as I mentioned him multiple times, has written the best books on water harvesting. There are many out there, and there's a lot of other great authors, but his are just, they're the top. Catching H2O is my good friend Brooke Sarson and Rosalind, who run a company out of North County, San Diego. They do gray water work and tank installs. Quail Springs Permaculture offers an online excellent permaculture course that you could check out if you're not able to do an in-person course. And they're out in the high desert in the Cuyama Valley. I was the executive director there for a while. We have the Oasis Design Gray Water. That's Art Ludwig's work. Highly recommend looking at his work. Total genius and incredible contributor to the fact that we even have legal gray water in California. Gray Water Action Network, if you're looking for a workshop or excellent texts as well to guide your own work at home. Ecology Artisans, a company I used to work with and work for in San Diego, if you also want to be inspired to see some really great work. And then ARCSA is the organization that you can also get you trained up more broadly when it comes to tank installs if you were thinking about becoming an installer, which I highly recommend because we don't really have many in the Southern California Riverside area. And then of course, that's my name at the top and my phone number if you'd like to reach out anytime. I'm going to stop screen sharing so that we can get to questions. Okay.
So Daniel, it's Jemmy. I'll proctor them for you. So let me know if you can't hear me and I can repeat them for you. So Deb asked a question. So where can you buy these large tanks reasonably?
Okay, so it used to be that we had a handful of distributors in Southern California. They've been priced out because of those unbelievable price increases I mentioned that continually are going through the roof. Really, you're looking at online purchases. Primarily, you're looking at Tank Mart, some of these really generic searches if you're looking for water harvesting tanks, Plastic Mart. These are some of the few places now that you can order a tank and maybe get it in reasonable time frame because they have so many in stock somewhere in a warehouse that they're able to ship to you, but no guarantees. Like I said, there's often a year lead time for a lot of these. Some say that they'll ship within 48 hours. If you see that on the listing, then that may mean that it's actually somewhere in stock in a warehouse where you can still get access to it. Other than that, there is one distribution yard in Alpine in Eastern San Diego. I could get that information. I don't have it right here on hand. Maybe we can put that on as an addendum or something to my slideshow that'll be available so that you can give them a call to see and check with them. That was how I was able to source that 5,050 gallon tank. They happened to have it in the yard, and we're able to bring it into a delivery into Riverside area.
Great. So next question. So when you were showing the video of the second home, what is between the broken concrete?
That's just decomposed granite. There's nothing else there. It's all the broken concrete sitting on a bed of 2 to 3 inches of decomposed granite. And then there's decomposed granite that has been carefully and very intensely hard packed in between those broken pieces of concrete and brick. And that has held up thus far. We've not had to add any, because the slopes are gentle enough at 2% grade, 3% max, which is approximately a quarter inch per foot of fall, right? We know that we can shuttle the water where we want it. So it used to be that it would flood that entire zone that you saw here, that in the front there, every time it rained. So we had to work with the poorly graded landscape and be very intentional about how we pitched that area so that the water wouldn't stay up near their front door and make its way into those basins. But to answer that question, it's just decomposed granite.
Okay, great. You sort of touched on this before, but Mindy just wants to know, can you also harvest your kitchen dishwater? I think is during your conversation of gray water.
Yes, you can. And it's not legal to do without jumping through all of the permitting processes that are required. And this is a great example of why I wrote Legalize Sustainability. This is like probably the next layer that needs to happen immediately, which is to make that process readily accessible to the average homeowner. There is some education in that, just as there was originally with laundry to landscape. You can't create mosquito vectors, so you can't have standing water somewhere. You need mulch basins for the water to get into. And you've got to be using the proper detergents so that you're not creating toxic issues what's the word I'm looking for? Anaerobic conditions in the soil wherever this is going. So there's some thought, of course, that has to go into it, but there are plenty of designers in the Southern California area, and that's their expertise, like myself, that are paid consultants to come in to make sure that that's done properly. And with enough workshops through our municipalities, for example, we could actually just make that accessible and common sense for the average homeowner. And that's really where it's got to go. So hopefully that answers the question. You've got to pull permits, and it's not easy and it's not fun. And so let's just say that not everyone pulls permits.
Actually, this isn't one of the questions, but just because you're on it, is there a permit number, for example, since you said it was 2 years that it took you all to create the permit? Is there a specific permit number for other people to be able to reference later?
Oh, that's a good question. I can look that up in my records. If there is one associated with it, I'm sure I could find a way to make it available, but it's not off the top of my head.
Okay, great.
I know the most important permit you have to access is what's called an encroachment permit. Because you're in the parkway, which is partially city property. So that's really important to the city. The city engineers were obsessed with the idea of scouring as an issue to undermine the roadway for the water transitioning from the gutter into the basin adjacent. And so that's where the rock work becomes incredibly important, because you won't end up with any scouring if the rock placement keeps any down cutting from happening, and you will never undermine the roadway. And this many years later, 8 years later, and it's been zero issues. So
great. So Barbara asked a question that I think maybe some others might have, which is, would you mind putting up the last slide so they can get the info off of it again?
Oh, sure. Yeah. How do I do that and still stay in here? Is that, or I guess I can still hear you if I do that, right?
Yeah, I think we can still see you even when your slides were up. So
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Okay. Let's see. How's that?
perfect.
Okay, great.
Okay. And then someone said, can someone post the resources on the UCANR site? I think Rosa, you said this would be, this is recorded, so I believe that it's going to be available sometime after today's presentation. But I think maybe Janice or,
That is correct. You are correct. It will be available both on BMS on the homepage, and it will be available on WMWD's website as well. Just need to give them a little bit of time to get it up and posted.
Mhm. Well, Tracy asked a question. I think you sort of quickly went over this on this slide in particular, but maybe you have more to add to this. So Tracy says, we have been actively looking for a designer or contractor company to help us replace our front turf with this exact type of water conscious, wildlife friendly landscaping, but have not found anybody in 6 weeks of daily searching. Do you have any resources we can contact for quotes? Home is in Riverside County.
So this is this is a tough topic. I am working on finding more people to refer to do this work, and it's been really tough to find people in the Inland Empire. There are people that will possibly come out to that region, and reaching out to the Ecology Center in San Juan Capistrano would be an idea if they haven't done that already, to see if they have any new contacts in this region, and hopefully they don't just say my name. And then the other place to inquire would be Ecology Artisans out of San Diego. There aren't many designers in the Riverside area. I'm still doing design work. I'm not doing install work anymore. I'm doing consulting and design only. If that's interesting to them, they can reach out to me and we can have a conversation. So yeah, I can leave it at that.
Thank you. So Artie says, we are demolishing a swimming pool. Can we install a tank in that space?
That's a great question. I'm actually working with some clients right now in Tustin who are exploring that whole issue. This is kind of a common refrain in good ecological design, as you'll hear people say, and I say it constantly, which is it depends. And without knowing some of the details of your specific situation and the type of pool you have, let's just say it's possible. It may not be the best decision without knowing quite a bit more. But yes, it's possible that a tank could fit inside there. And then you're dealing with the issue of pumping water, and pumps, range from $1,500 to $3,000. And then you've got to figure out how you're going to distribute that water with a pump system. All doable, all possible. Becomes a little more complicated when you're not using gravity to your advantage.
Great. Jerry has a question, and Jerry, I apologize. You may have to maybe let me know if I'm understanding this correctly. So the question is, are weed barriers safe for the environment? I guess in relation to these water harvesting.
Weed barriers. No. Anytime you bury plastic in the ground, you're compromising soil health.
Yeah.
That's kind of yeah. So I would just say no. Is there a place for weed mats and weed barriers? Possibly. I don't use them anymore in any of my designs. I found them to be an unnecessary step that just becomes a hindrance down the line and weighs heavy on my conscience. I'm trying to deal with less plastic in my life, not putting more plastic in the ground just for the next generation to deal with. So occasionally a geotextile fabric liner is used in really intense water harvesting work, like where you're putting in what are called Zuni bowls This is at a larger scale of creek restoration. And there may be a place for that when there's so much heavy down cutting in a stream, both, well, that's a whole other conversation. And in the most common practices inside of a average landscape, you really don't need a weed mat.
Okay, great. Does anybody else have any more questions?
I have one quick question.
Yeah, Janice.
Are you familiar with the conversion of pools into ponds? I have seen this done in San Diego County for the Native Plant Society. A few of the home tours that I was on have actually taken their pools and converted them into like freshwater ponds. So it's creating its own ecosystem.
Yes, I'm familiar. That's not my expertise.
Mhm.
What I do understand in our Southern California climate is some of the calculations from other folks that I'm connected to who have explored these concepts of creating ecologically intact pond systems by retrofitting pools. You need approximately 16 foot of depth in order to deal with the amount of evaporation loss from the surface area of an average pool. Most people don't have a pool that's 16 feet deep. So you're looking at a lot of, and not that ponds don't have an ecological place in our landscapes, and there may be added benefit. Let's say you can pump water from that pond part of the year and give it to crops or to orchards. Then you might be making an argument for something that's really beneficial. But for, I think for most situations, it's a losing sum game ecologically.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else with some questions? I mean, I have one meanwhile while we wait for a couple more maybe to come in. So the tanks, you mentioned there's a number that could be placed maybe on Amazon or, wherever they exist. But do you recommend a certain type of material that it has to be? Because, as this becomes more popular, people will start making things out of anything. And so I wonder whether or not, does it have to be BPA free, UV protected? Is there something you'd recommend in terms of the type of tanks that we're looking for something like this?
Great question, Jimmy. Great question. So a water harvesting tank, if it's denoted or specifically called out as such on a website that sells tank systems or tanks, is going to be high density polyethylene. And high density polyethylene is UV stable. It has pigments inside there to create UV stability, but it's still susceptible to the intensity of our sun and probably has about a 20-year lifespan before it might develop a crack. Anytime you can cast shade over one of these tank systems, you're extending the life of that tank. I would not purchase another tank made out of anything else unless it was metal or ferrous cement. Those are really your three options. Hopefully we're going to move towards ferrous cement as the long-term solution for tank systems for Southern California. It just hasn't become cost effective yet. But you could imagine building a tank that say is 15 or 20,000 gallons using ferrous cement technology, which you can look up. I could talk a whole other couple hours on just ferrous cement. If you look up that technology as a highest and best use of cement, you could imagine an entire block could share a 20 or 30,000 gallon tank where all their roof water is going into the same tank, and then you distribute it from there. But we're just not at that kind of creative retrofit solution oriented mind, collective mind just yet. But that will be the future of water harvesting if we make it that far.
Just to clarify, FARA as in capital FARA, the FARA.
Ferrous, yeah.
Okay.
So looking at high density polyethylene plastic tanks is a temporary Band-Aid solution to our water crisis. It's just the quickest way we know right now, since we're masters at making plastic, everything plastic. We've created these tank systems that are light, they're easy to ship, you can immediately put them to use, and that's incredibly useful. There's no doubt about it. But we can't constantly use plastic tanks. Will not be the long-term solution to this issue. It'll have to scale up into more enduring materials. But that's like I said, a whole other conversation, something all my colleagues and I are in regular conversation about, trying to figure out how to move away from plastic tanks. Really, the maxim is the most ecological is the most economical. Most economical is the most ecological. And when you look at storing water into basins by just putting the proper scalloped depressions on your landscape, it's actually the highest and best use of water in the landscape outside. Tank systems are expensive and essentially start to degrade the day you put them in. Whereas a basin system just gets richer and richer over time. The only maintenance you have to a basin system is to occasionally pull out. When I say occasionally, I'm saying every like 3 to 5 years, depending on how much water makes it into there, maybe even longer. You're pulling out beautiful black gold soil from the bottom of those basins and then resupplying more wood chip and carbon to the top to top it off again. And that's all the maintenance that's really required of a basin system.
So
Wonderful.
Justin, is this a practice that they're using outside of the United States? I know many countries use they're called water tanks, but they're ground level and they are in ground. And basically it is still municipal water in many cases, and it's then pumped from these tanks into the house. So that would be that same sort of concrete,
Yes.
type of concrete that you're talking about?
That's a ferrocement concrete cistern. Yeah, they refer to those as cisterns primarily in the other parts of the world. Australia has been on this for a lot longer than us.
Mhm.
And you're describing exactly right. They're usually buried underground. And at times they harvest water from rainstorms, and at other times it's municipal water being pumped to residences to be used on demand. That's
Thank you.
correct. Yeah.
Well,
I wanted to point out too in this last slide, just for the fun of it, this is a beautiful basket as you see there. It's from Oaxaca, and it's made out of arundo donax, the same material that has been tried to be fully eradicated from the Santa Ana River bottom as an invasive species, as a giant reed. This is a great example of how other cultures interpret issues as opportunities. We just don't have master weavers in our culture here in Southern California, but this is what's possible with something that we've been trying to poison away or eradicate through physical removal for the better part of the past half century. But I found it amazing when I was there and I saw this. I was like, this can't be arundo, and it was.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any
Thank
other
you, Daniel.
questions? Okay, wait, there's one new message. Oh, it's from Jummy. Okay, I think that basically wraps it up for today. I thank you all for attending. And a big thank you to Daniel. We want you to come back
Yes.
again. We would like a list of all of your possible topics of discussion.
Okay, well, thank you. I wanted a special thanks to all of you at the Extension Center and Master Gardeners and the Western Municipal Water District, especially to Lisa. Thank you so much for making this happen and for having me be a part of this again. Grateful to all of you who made it happen and were able to attend. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you so
Daniel.
much.
Stay safe.
You too.
Stay
Thank you,
safe and
Daniel.
have
Thank
some
you, everybody.
wonderful.
Thank
Okay.
you, Justin. So good that you're here. I love it.
Wonderful presentation, Daniel. I put my phone number in the chat for anyone who wants to reach out and see the yard itself. You're always welcome.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. You may find some master gardeners in your front yard one morning.
It won't be the first time, and I certainly
No.
hope it won't be the last.
Great, thank you so much.
Take care.
Have a great day,
Take care,
everyone.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.